Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rob Shmuel Ben Yehoshua, Rashbi, Rabbi Stephen Epstein with you for this week's Devar Torah. And this week we are going to be talking about our good friend Korach, who led a rebellion or tried to lead a rebellion in the wilderness. And we're going to come to that a little bit. It would be negligent of me to discuss kind of what's going on in the world right now. We all know that Israel has attacked preemptively Iran and has done some major damage to Iran's military infrastructure. So a lot of people might think, it was brutal, it was unfair, but Iran has made no bones. They have not hidden the fact that they see Israel as not the great Satan, that's America, but a Satan. They want to wipe us off the map. They don't like Jews. They see us as a threat. They have supported what's known as proxies. These are groups that are basically doing the fighting for them. That would be Hamas, who attacked Israel from Gaza. It would be Hezbollah from Lebanon and the Houthis from Yemen. So Israel finally said, enough's enough. They created Iron Dome as kind of a measure so they wouldn't have to go to war, so that when countries shot missiles at them, this was a defense that would take out those missiles and prevent damage. And they thought maybe people might get the hint and say, okay, enough's enough, let's leave them alone. All it did was basically strengthen their resolve, it seems. And Israel, again, finally said, we've had enough. We're tired of fighting. We're going to eliminate Iran before they have a nuclear weapon to use against us, because, again, Iran has made absolutely no bones about the fact that that's what they want to do. So there it is. Now, where does that leave us Jews? Well, we know that in the Torah, it says, if you know that your enemy is going to attack you to kill you, this is in the Torah. And the oral law says, well, in order to do that, you have to have somebody that hears, two witnesses that hear somebody plan that, and two witnesses that say, don't do it, try to dissuade them from carrying out the attack, and they don't do it. Then basically, what are you going to do? You're going to wait for them to kill you, or what? You take steps to make sure that doesn't happen. So there it is. So does this have anything to do with our portion? Because those of you that listen to my Devar Torah know that I believe the Torah is timeless. It's relevant depending on where you are or when you are. We have these people in the desert. Now let's look at what's led up to this rebellion. We've had the Israelites were liberated from Egypt. They had their backs against the sea. God opened a passage for them. They went through, and God also drowned the Egyptians that were following them, once again, looking to kill some of them and take them back to bondage. The Israelites complained they had no food or water in the desert. God provided water every 3 days through the virtue of Miriam. By the way, the Hebrew word for water is Mayim. Miriam, yes, that's where her name comes from. God provided manna in the desert, food that was everybody's perfect flavor, perfect taste. God protected people, had pillars of cloud and fire to make sure that it led the way, and still the Israelites were not satisfied. When God said to Moses, you can send out spies to reconnoiter the promised land, Canaan as it was known at the time, which sounds like a sound military strategy, except you do that for the purposes of planning, not so that 10 of your 12 spies can come back and freak everybody out saying these people are huge, we're like grasshoppers in our eyes, and as we were to them, and we're not going to be able to do it, and God's leading us into certain death. They just didn't get it. God says to Moses, I'm done. 10 times these people have tested me. 10 times I've come through. I've gave them more than enough chances. 10 spies were out there for 40 days, a year for a day. 40 years they're going to wander in the desert and they're going to die out because there's no way they're going to be able to conquer the land, and their children will be hardier and more in a position to do that. So the Israelites were just basically informed that they were just sentenced to a long, protracted death. They're going to die out in the desert, and they were removed from Egypt for their thinking just to die out here. What was the point of all that? Not taking any responsibility for their actions. So now the time's ripe for dissension. Now comes this guy Korach, who was a Levite. He was a cousin of Moses and Aaron, and he was left out of the leadership. He didn't get to be the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. He didn't even get to be among the Kohanim, the clans, that got to attend to the materials, to the buildings of the Mishkan. He was just a flunky Levite. He's the one that had to serve the Kohanim, which he felt demeaning. He didn't like it. So what does he do? He tries to overthrow Moses and Aaron. First, he says that it's not really God, it's really Moses' idea. Has anybody ever heard Moses talk to God? Then he does this whole pedagogue thing where he says, okay, so Moses is telling us we have to take a little thread of blue, which, by the way, was in the last portion, the idea of putting the techelet, the tzitzit, on the fringes on your clothes. So what if I have a garment made of blue wool? Do I still have to put that thread on there? And they're saying, yeah. And he says, see how stupid this all sounds? Okay, so, and it wasn't legitimate. Okay, the idea of the threads and the knots is it's a reminder. It's like, I don't know about, people watching and listening to this, what your generation was like, but when I was a kid at school and you forgot your homework, the teacher tied a little string around your finger so that you would remember it the next day, right? That's what the ancients used to do. They used to use knots to remind themselves of things. That's where the idea of the tzitzits comes from. So he was trying to turn the facts against Moses. Now, this may sound very familiar to a lot of you folks who follow politics, because this is what politicians do. I will say that Russia's been doing this for years. When I was a kid, back in the 60s, I used to listen to shortwave radio. I used to love the English broadcasts from countries all over the world. And Russia, Radio Moscow, would make presentations, and this is exactly what they did. This was their propaganda. You start with the truth, and then you take it in a direction that suits your purposes. Okay? Are we supposed to put blue threads on our clothes, on the tzitzit? Yes. Okay. All right. So here this guy comes, and how can I use this against them? And this is what he did. Not only that, but then you've got Dathan and Abiram. You all know Dathan from the movie The Ten Commandments. That was Edward G. Robinson, who, by the way, is Jewish, or was Jewish. And then you have some of the princes also challenging him. So those rebellions were put down. Those rebellions were put down because Moses said, bring your censers. Your censer, it's a pan, and they would put coals in it, and they would put the incense and burn. That's what they did for the incense back then. Okay, and whoever incense God accepts, that's the chosen person, and God, of course, chose Moses. And then with Korach and his 250 followers or so, opened the ground, swallowed them up whole. Then there was Dathan and Abiram, then there was their rebellion, and God sent a plague, and then there's Aaron going around and holding up his staff, which blossomed, and having people look upward by holding it up, and that way people were spared the plague. So that's what they did, because Moses and Aaron were humanists. They believed in people. They didn't want to see the destruction. And they wanted the people to see that they were acting in their behalf. So they acted on behalf of the people to save their lives. Now, in our triennial portion, it focuses on the gifts to the Levites and the Kohanim. They had no means of support other than by the gifts that people would bring when they did offerings. And also from the tithes, the tax. The tithe, by the way, is an old Greek word meaning tenth, because that was the tax. Everybody gave a tenth of their earnings, and that was it. That's how the Kohanim and the Levites, the priests and the ministers respectively, would sustain themselves. And yet, the Aliyah that opens up our portion starts with the verses, a couple of verses that say that the people were freaking out. They were upset. Oh my gosh, incense is a death sentence, and then it goes right into the idea of supporting the priests and the ministers. What's the connection? Consider this. Consider that when everything seems crazy and your life is challenged and you don't know where to turn and things are dire, what do? You turn to spirituality. You turn back to God. You follow God's precepts, God's commandments, and everything works out. And I think that's the message. I think, again, in the Torah, nothing happens randomly. It's all for a specific purpose. So the idea is to follow God's way. That's what we have to do today while we Jews are under attack. Follow God's way. Defend yourself. Use the legal system for all the oppression that's going on in this country, and Israel is doing what it can to survive itself. Remember, faith in God, faith in God's precepts and principles, and that's where I think our salvation is. Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for listening.